Well, I started off at the age of 19 in a division called the Programme Planning Department, and we scheduled the programmes for Granada TV and ITV. So I did that at the beginning and sort of at the end of my career down in London. The environment is really important that we put ourselves in, and I'd ended up with this job that was so deeply depressing me. It was I was ending up in such a state that just walking into that building was making me ill, was making me poorly. We get so carried away doing life for everybody else.
Exactly.
The end result of everything that we do is a release. It's called a detox symptom. And it could be yawning, laughter, burping, the other end, sweating, cold, feeling a little bit dizzy. All of those are detox symptoms, but the yawn in particular became a real significant issue that I needed to look deeper into. During lockdown, I created a training school based on a new modality called TAR EFT. EFT is emotional freedom technique. Live for Energy Training College, and we do a lot of the science now as well behind the courses. So I have what's called a weirdoscope. Oh, I should have put it on actually.
Welcome to Ask the Author, a show about inspiring stories and conversations by creatives and all forms of art, music, movies, visual art, authors, creative writing, poetry, dance, culinary art, among others. Brought to you by the multi-award-winning author, life coach, and poet, Richard Mwebesa.
All right, welcome back to Ask the Author. I am your host, Richard Mwebesa. We have been cooking something for you, and I have a very interesting guest this time from across the continent of Europe. She is a very interesting person. Her name is Rachel Yawning. I don't know if I pronounced the name right.
Perfect.
Yes. Who is a very, 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 very power-packed and loaded expert in mental health. She is her past life. She was a producer and a person who worked in television in the United Kingdom, in UK. She transitioned into consultancy. She's also an author. She's an entrepreneur and a founder of a very interesting teaching practice. And she's a person who loves nature and loves plants, quite loaded. And today we're going to have a very interesting conversation about something that people underlook and do not see as valuable, yet it is one that brings healing to many. So with me is Rachel. Rachel, welcome to Ask the Author Show.
Oh, thank you, Richard. What a delight to be here. Thank you so much. I do need to put that right. I was never a producer in TV. I did work behind the scenes within the television industry for for 20 years, but I was not a producer. So just in case anyone's watching and say, oh, she's claiming she's a producer. No, I wasn't.
Wow. Thank you for clarifying. But what did you do in television? What exactly? Would you care to share?
Well, I started off at the age of 19 in a division called the Program Planning Department, and we scheduled the programs for Granada TV and ITV. So I did that at the beginning and sort of at the end of my career down in London. And then for the rest of the time, I worked in production. So I worked on things like You've Been Framed and Cluedo and The Street and Vincent dramas, all sorts of different things, and had so much fun.
So would I say you were like a programs director of sorts?
No, I worked for the executive producer and did a lot of when my husband left me, I went back part-time, which is very unusual in that industry, and I took a part-time job just as the PA there and looked after things that way. And before that, I was researching, coordinating, so I was always looking after everybody.
Administration.
Yeah, so always looking after everybody else.
Wow, interesting. Wow, so how did you get a passion to go into mental health?
Well,
what drove you to that space?
Well, probably because I worked in television and I was always looking after everybody else. I was very good at looking after people. I was very good at recognizing the signs of overwhelm, burnout, distress, because it's a very intense industry. So when you're working on a production for 3 to 6 months and the stakes are very, very high, people are really at the cutting edge of what they're doing, then it's very easy for them to burn out towards the end of that production. So I was always the one sort of picking up the pieces along the way, looking after everybody, making sure that as well as doing my job, but also that was my nature, to make sure that everybody was okay along the way, I suppose.
Wow. So was that like a passion for you, or it was a job first? Then you realize you're good at it, and then you decided to make a career out of it. What was your turning point in
My
the whole
turning
construct?
point, I suppose, was when my husband left me with 3 boys under 6. And at that point, I was in transition we'd moved from London back to Manchester, and I wasn't working because the boys were just too young. So he left, and I had the biggest meltdown. I fell apart, really, but within 6 months, I'd managed to secure a job back into the television industry part-time, and that helped me feel like I was still part of the human race and get going. But then after several redundancies, I needed to retrain and refocus, and because my mental health wasn't stable, really, looking after the boys, being distraught about what was happening, I decided to retrain to help the boys, actually, and then realised that I'd perhaps missed that opportunity, because as I was training, they were obviously getting older, and by the time they were teenagers, they were so not interested in what I was doing. Not at all. So I started to help everybody else, and then they've come round as they've got older and seen the work that I've done. They've seen how I work with people. They've seen people transition from very distressed stages into really beautiful stages, and that's helped them come to terms now with what I do, and even ask for help, which is a bonus.
Yeah, well, that's quite interesting. I believe your personal experience is what drove you, and your passion for helping people drove you into the career of mental health. Because, I mean, you mentioned something to do with pressure. stress, burnout. These are real life scenarios in the workplace today, and there are mental health challenges and obstacles. And if you ask me, I believe not many know how to, one, recognize, two, diagnose, three, identify, four, and find solutions to these mental health challenges. Because one thing I know for sure is they destroy productivity, they destroy self-esteem, they destroy self-worth, and they make people feel defeated and stuck. So
You're
that's
absolutely right, Richard. But not only that, it destroys family life, because that's exactly
yes.
why I believe my marriage fell apart, because my then husband worked in the prison service, and he was in a very pressurized position, and coming home to three young boys under the age of 6 probably is what maybe tipped him over the edge, because he didn't probably feel he had anyone to speak to. I mean, I'm speaking for him here, I don't actually know, but when you are so burnt out, when you are so under that pressure and you feel like you have nowhere to turn and you don't know what to do with yourself, it massively impacts your family.
Yeah.
Massively.
Yeah,
And
true
we see
story.
families falling apart all around the world because of the pressures of work, because we expect that one person to pick up the pieces, and when they can't, because they're under pressure of looking after a family themselves, and that communication breaks down. It's when that communication completely breaks down that we end up, no matter where we are, whether it's work or home or in our communities, that
Yeah.
we have these societal issues.
Wow. Wow. This is a very, very touchy topic. Say it because mental health is a big issue lately. When you look at the statistics world over, there are many, many mental health challenges, and they manifest in different forms. And as you mentioned,
Sorry,
the
that's me.
burnout. Uh, that's okay. The burnout, the self-sabotage, negative thoughts, depression in itself, among others. These are very big issues. So, what then drove you to start this call that helps families, businesses, and different people all over the world in the space of mental health?
Well, because I'm naturally a positive person, I really struggle when I'm feeling down. It is the worst feeling in the world. And when you are feeling like that over a period of time, it becomes harder and harder to drag yourself out of that hole that you find yourself in. And that repeating conversation that's going around in your own head, and you're listening to yourself talking to others, and you see people stepping away from you, people that you love, over and over again might step away from you because you're still repeating the same mistakes. In a way, we haven't learnt from them. So I was repeating the same conversations, I was repeating the same behavior, and I wasn't recognizing it until key people who I really loved started to step away from my life. And it became so apparent to me that actually, well, what if it's not them? What if it's me? And when I started to really look at me and be very, very honest, I didn't actually like what I was seeing and hearing. And that was really deeply uncomfortable, because I was recognizing I was hurting, not physically, but I was hurting my children with the things I was saying, with the instant reactions and outbursts that I might have of not being able to cope with one situation. If I was being asked something at home, then I'd be snapping. And I didn't want that to happen. So I started to use whatever creativity I had left inside me to do something else. And because of my background, I suppose, in television, that was a huge saviour, because you've got to think outside of the box. You've got to think much wider, a
True. Yeah.
really big scale. You've got to think of something.
Broaden your perspective.
Yeah, so big, so expansive that you can't possibly reach it all in one day. But when you start to take these little bites out of it, you start to make headway, but it's still there. It's still something to aim for. It's still beautiful and shiny, whatever that is for you, enough to make you keep going for it day after day after day.
Wow. So would you say self-awareness or self-disruption is one of the core issues for you to step out of a mental health challenge? Or what are the factors? Are they external or internal, or both factors?
I think they're both, and especially from a female perspective of being at home with three young boys and a dog, and not having any money coming in, and knowing that I then needed to find work, and the instability of whether their dad was actually going to cover any of those costs, because it was always a little bit hit and miss because of his own situation. So I had to take back my control as to what I could do to help that. And that's an internal thing, but it's also an external thing. You've got to internally hold yourself together to actually then go out and get that work and get that job and retrain and find a balance. And I had many jobs after I'd left television that took me into deeper dive into my own mental health demise, because I was going into the wrong jobs. I was picking environments that were so tightly closed in, I couldn't express myself. I was so restricted by the boundaries. I couldn't breathe.
Yeah. I like what you said. Expression is true. I mean, when you're doing something that I'm an author as well. In my first book, chapter 1, Called Out of the Crowd, I say, if you're doing a job or doing something that you're not made for or wired for, you become what we call a leather, a juice, and an apple shoe. Something that is inauthentic, because you're forcing it. It's not something which is within your skill set, within your competencies, within your passions. So this becomes a struggle in itself. So when you do it, instead of feeling fulfillment, because you want to pay the bills, you need a paycheck coming in, you end up actually digging a hole for yourself, and then things get worse. So you mentioning that, I mean, that confirms exactly that notion that I wrote about. But that said, one of the things you mentioned is about the environment. Sometimes we don't get to choose our environment. We get to live in it, so we remain productive and active. But what is critical? How did you then reshape or reimagine or revisualize yourself? Because you mentioned your career transition, and career transition is something so difficult to do, because I mean, you have to unlearn the things you already know. You have to learn new things. You have to step up into new relationships or make new friends and new acquaintances. So it's hard work. So what was your pivot as Rachel for you? How did it unfold for you?
What you're saying here is so true, Richard, because the environment is really important that we put ourselves in. And I'd ended up with this job that was so deeply depressing me. It was I was ending up in such a state that just walking into that building was making me ill, was making me poorly. And the only way, now fortunately I had started to train in the modalities that I do now, and I think the first one that I'd done was Reiki, and I'd started to train in Reiki, and a week later I had no fear whatsoever, and I picked up my bag at lunchtime and I walked out of that building, and I never went back.
It just didn't make sense. You just threw in the towel
I just
Bold.
went and spoke to one guy and said, look, I'm handing this over to you now. I'm not going to be coming back. I did go back, but that was to sit down at the tribunal and put my case forward as to why I was leaving and what they needed to change. And they wanted me to come back. And I said, yes, I could come back, but I'm not going to put myself through that, because I know I can change and I know I can put up with helping to move this company forward. But the people that I'm working with are not able to do that yet. They don't have the skills, they don't have the mindset, they don't have the will to change how they are behaving to a woman to do that yet. And until that change has happened, why would I put myself and keep myself in that situation? So I gave them this blueprint to work with before I finally left the organization. But at the same time, as I was off on sick with them, I was retraining to do all the things that I'm doing now.
Interesting, because I think what I hear you say is one of the core things within the mental health journey is you ought to be self-aware. Yeah. Self-awareness is a very powerful tool, or powerful alertness, I would say, if I should use that word, for you to be able to know that this I can do, this I cannot do. What does it do? It constructs your boundaries. Yeah, it helps you set boundaries. It helps you expand yourself in terms of your capabilities, to say that I can put my value here, and I'll only stay in a place where I'm valued, and will give this value in exchange for a safer environment. And one of the key things, being a coach, I always talk to the team I coach, and I share and I say, one of the core things within growth and development, personal development and personal growth, one of the key things we ought to do as individuals is first of all to construct our why. And that's what I write about in the book as well, Out of the Crowd. I always refer to my book because most of this research, construct your why, your reason for being, because we are human beings, we are not human doings. Now, when we take jobs, this, if you're not self-aware, instead of becoming, you end up be doing. I mean, there's no English word that means be do, but I mean, you tend to become what you're doing. And then this steals away your identity, as a person, your awareness, your consciousness, your alertness, your very being, because you feel like you're not breathing anymore, because you're just doing, instead of being who you are, because we become, we do not be do. So that's quite interesting. That's quite interesting. When you raise that, I was like, wow. And now this makes sense from an expert like you.
That is really powerfully put, because we get so carried away doing life for everybody else. Exactly. For everybody else, for our children, for our partner, for our community, that we forget to who we are as an individual and what that feels like. What does that mean actually as an individual? To offer that deeper essence of ourselves. And if we're not in connection with that deeper essence of ourselves, then
we're purposeless.
Yeah, we confuse our physical bodily symptoms with illness. And because I've dealt with so many people who have got anxiety, stress, burnout, long-term COVID, from children to adults, whose bodily symptoms give them these signals, and they immediately relate them to a disease, to a condition, to a label. That during lockdown, I created a training school based on a new modality called TAR EFT, and EFT is emotional freedom technique. And I had to break down emotional freedom technique into a way that my brain could understand how it worked. Now, emotional freedom technique is like acupuncture, but with no needles. And you tap on certain parts of your body where the meridian points are. and there's an NLP language that you use, and it works. It clears away very, very quickly emotional stress. Now, through that process, as you're recognizing this, you become very aware of what your body is doing. So it might move a certain way. You might yawn, you might laugh, you might get uncomfortable, you might need to dash to the loo. You become very aware of all these bodily symptoms, but you become aware of them in a way that is actually positive rather than negative. It might be inconvenient, but you become aware that that is happening because you are letting go of old information. So as I developed TAR EFT, which actually gave an explanation that, well, this point here, you were tapping underneath your cheekbone. This is your stomach meridian, which seems really weird that if you tap under here, it's affecting like a big string going down through your stomach. But you'll see athletes on TV who are preparing for the Olympics and championship races, they'll start tapping here because when they get butterflies, it helps to soothe the butterflies in their stomach.
Soothe, I'll calm them down.
Yeah.
Wow.
So as I started to put my own course together that gave a deeper explanation as to these certain points, it started to slow things down to such an extent that would take maybe a week to work on one area. And as we slowed things down, but this was integrated into people's everyday life, so they'd just tap on this for the day and carry on around the day and see what happened with certain protocols that I'd explained in the course. And then they'd come back and they'd be able to relate it to very important stories of their own life, of exactly what they were feeling or what was happening to their body. So for example, a lady who we were working on her kidney meridian, which is this one here, and she'd only completed part of the week's work, and she came on the call on the Sunday and she said, is there any reason why I can't finish my decorating? I can't get up the ladder because I've got vertigo. And the only difference I can think of is I've been doing this course and it's given me vertigo. So I said to her, okay, how interesting. I said, did you finish the week's work? She said, no. And I said, okay. I said, so we've been working on the kidney meridian. This is related to water. Do you think there is something that you don't want to hear and you've collected water in your ears that is now making you out of balance? And as soon as I said those words to her, she was able to relate, just by that, something that related to her very personal story that week, and it made perfect sense to her. She said, I know exactly what to do. She went away, she finished the week's work, and she came back the next day and she went, I finished my decorating. I was able to get up the ladder and sort it out. She said, but what was really strange is that I yawned and yawned and yawned to release that fluid out of my ear, and now it's gone.
Wow. Interesting stuff. So one of the things I heard you mention is you have a course that you researched and that you share with businesses, individuals, organizations to help them with mental stress or mental health issues. So I would like to hear more about that. And then later we'll come and talk about your book, because I just learned you're also an author. You've written a book, about your work. Yeah, so tell us more about this mystery of what you do exactly.
Well, now my work has taken me directly to the yawn. It's taken me through all the different therapies that I do to the end result of nearly every session that I and most therapists who are working the way that I do to clear out this energetic stress. The end result of everything that we do is a release. It's called a detox symptom. And it could be yawning, laughter, burping, the other end, sweating, cold, feeling a little bit dizzy. All of those are detox symptoms, but the yawn in particular became a real significant issue that I needed to look deeper into, and that's basically what I've been doing.
So before we go into the detail of the great big yawn, what's the name of your school?
The Live for Energy Training College.
College. It's a college.
It's a college, yeah.
Wow. Live for,
and so it's Live, LIVE, number 4, college, Live for Energy Training College. And we do a lot of the science now as well behind the courses. So I have what's called a weirdoscope. Oh, I should have put it on actually. A weirdoscope which collects data from the actual room to see if we are able to affect the machinery with our conversation, with our energy. It has 2
why do you call it a weird
generators in it.
2 generators. Why do you call it a weird scope?
It's a weirdoscope because the Go Weird team created it. Now the Go Weird team originated from Princeton University, and about 30 years ago, the dean was approached at Princeton University by a student who wanted to see if she could research this. And she couldn't find anybody to basically represent her study. So she asked the dean, and the dean said, oh, do you need to build it? And she said, yes, because it's an engineering university. So he said, if you need to build it, then I'll support you. So she went and did the research, and then she lost interest after she'd done her degree. But the research was so interesting that the dean, Robert Jean, carried that on for the next 28 years with a lady called Brenda Dunn. And they used these random event generators to take to the pyramids. They put them on plants. The plants was one of the very first things they actually looked at. And they'd have plants in a room, and they would give the lights, the plants, access to the light, so they could control the lights. And they monitored it on these.
Wow, Rachel, I'm getting excited. I'm getting so excited. I need you to turn that device on, please. Find it. I need to see it. It's quite fascinating. Wow.
I don't know where I put it. So it's here. So this is it here. This is the weirdoscope. And it's a very small machine, and it collects, it's got 2 random event generators, and it throws out zeros and ones into the atmosphere. I mean, millions of them, throws them all out into, and the probability.
So is it on as we have this conversation?
No, it's not.
Measuring us?
No, and there's no point me now putting it on sort of halfway through. It was so last minute with this conversation, I didn't even think about it. But I can give you data I've got 12 months of data now, which is very exciting. And so there's 2 machines in here throwing out these zeros and ones, and the probability of us being able to bring any of those zeros and ones to a peak at any point, or to come out of the bell-shaped curve or entangle in the bell-shaped curve, is really remote. It's really remote. And yet it happened. A lot.
So one in how many millions?
Oh, well, it's not necessarily millions, but the data that I'm collecting, these machines have been in football matches, Premiership matches such as Notts Forest and Arsenal games, to see if they score the goals, if there's any what they call a correlation of data. Now, what's really interesting is what would you think? What would you say that data might look like? Do you think there'd be a few peaks?
Okay.
With thousands of people in the room, you'd think there would be some data. There's no data. There's no correlation data. However, when these are taken into Tantra meditation workshops, when they've been put in hospices and AE places when people pass away. What happens in a room when someone has passed away, where there should be no activity going on in that room? there are peaks.
Wow, interesting.
So what is happening in that room when somebody passes away? Well, we've got a really good idea of what that might be. And we can't prove anything, but it's pretty impressive data. So what happens when we, as an organisation for the Great Big Yawn, do a yawnathon, and we come on for half an hour and we just talk about yawning, and then we put a 15-minute aside for us to contagiously yawn together, see if we're just for 15 minutes able to affect that machinery. It appears that the random event generator really likes that data. It
Yawns.
really likes yawns. Because what we're doing is actually very intentionally choosing to spend 15 minutes together relieving tension.
Tension. Okay. Interesting. So tell us more, because it looks like there's a language in yawning. So, and there's healing. Yawning is medicine. I just heard you say that. Yeah. Tell us more about how the yawn affects human life, how it affects stress, how it brings healing to the body. Very interesting, very exciting notion. I know our audience would like to hear more and learn more about it.
And it really is turning into one of these subjects that, we associate the yawn, don't we, of being associated to boredom, apathy, exhaustion, hunger, thirst. And it may very well be attached to all of those things. But when we think about the language of someone yawning, and then immediately the language that follows that might be, am I boring you?